Begin the current Daf from Pesachim Daf Yomi. Begin 3 lines down with the top of the Yomim. We continue the theme of our previous Mishnah, which we were discussing when someone titled the parak as Il Dvarm, the things that you do with the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Then we discuss when you do it in a oifen of psul, if you do it in an invalid way regarding a liability because it's not a valid Korban Pesach. And then our Gemara continues to explain the halach of our Mishnah when you do it shalei lo'ichlav, if you do it in ways that are invalid regarding what the status is regarding Chil Shabbos. Shiz corresponds to Bekal Zech Nechesko to any time Daf Chaim. Appreciate is joining us for today's daf. Some things we're going to discuss in today's daf are shechting a Korban Pesach on Shabbos for people who are ineligible to eat it. So then, like we said, you can be chayiv for Chil Shabbos because you have no heter to do it. Now, one could only be chayiv for Chil Shabbos if the act was what's called somewhat constructive. And that argument goes through to try to define what were the constructive elements in each of the cases of our Mishnah. You're generally potter when you do makalkal. So if you're doing a puzzle, if the carbon is a puzzle, it's invalidating, it's a kilkel. So what would be the chiyuv of the Chil Shabbos if you're not doing an act of tikkun? You only if you do tikkun. That's what the Gemara's first discussion is going to be. Then the Gemara gets into discussion regarding a carbon that can no longer be used for its originally intended purpose. It's not a valid. So then the question is, do you need what's called a kira? Do you have to uproot it from its title and switch it to something else? Specifically in our daf, we're going to discuss unless we're going to Korban Pesach, which if it's not valid as a Korban Pesach anymore, do you have to go ahead and make it into a shlama? Or like by a kira, you don't have to. Let's say you have an asham that has a blemish and then you can use it as an oil. Do you have to be menatik it? Do you have to uproot it? Or is it automatic? So other important terms and concepts we have in today's daf are mekaltal b'chabur pater. That although generally there's a halacha that kilkul, when you do something destructive, you pater, because Shabbos is 39 constructive activities, it has to be a tikkun. But there's a discussion regarding chabura, things which are instinctive, intrinsically destructive, that those things that if you're going to be pater or chayiv on a kilkul of chabura, when you're creating like a wound. Asham shnitik l'riya is the concept that an asham that developed a blemish, you have to let it go out to graze till it develops a blemish, and then it's going to be able to be used for a different carbon. Ibatsura are that there's certain types of invalidations in the carbon that you're not yisarf miyad, you don't burn it right away. You have to leave it out overnight till it develops the mum of nicer, and only then could you burn it because it's still an external type of a problem to the carbon, and hence it's not appropriate to burn it yet because it's still considered on some level as kachin. Nirva nitcha is the concept that if something was once eligible to be brought to the carbon, then it was rejected, regarding if shuv niro or not, are you going to be able to then, if it comes back to be viable, is it going to be able to be brought as a carbon or not? So begin the current daf, ayin gimel and alf, 3 lines down at the top of the yomid, where we had mentioned a few different items. If you did the machshava in the shchita, what the halacha is going to be. So one of the things, as our Gemara quotes, was shav shloi lo'ichlav. If you slaughtered the carbon, not for those that could eat it, and you did it on Shabbos, okay, so then you can be chayiv. You can be chayiv for Chil Shabbos because the carbon is possible. You're not allowed to do malach on Shabbos. You're only allowed to do because the Korban Pesach says b'mayadoi. But that's if the Korban Pesach. If you did it for shalei lo'ichlav, so that's a psul in the Korban Pesach. So then you be chayiv. So then the Gemara says pshita, obviously. Ki even the hasan, since we already learned this on Daf Samach Aleph and Alf and Perak Tama Nishchan, that a Pesach that shalei lo'ichlav is going to be possible. Okay, we could take the next step and say so hachas over here. They were talking about on Shabbos. Obviously, we could infer that chayiv that you'd be liable for Chil Shabbos because you already told me it's a pastel carbon. I can know 1 + 1 is 2. So well, you're right. That's not a chiddush. It's because of the seifa that said that if you're going to do it if you can do it for those who could eat it and some that cannot eat it, that we wanted to tell you that pater. So Tana Reisha. So we said the first half of the halacha that if you can do it just for shloi lo'ichlav, then you're going to be chayiv. So the Gemara says, okay, that's also obvious. Shon Kash already told you also on Perak Tama Nishchan that if you do it for miktas oichel, meaning if some of the members of the chabur could eat, some cannot eat, that it's going to be kasha, so hacha pater. Obviously over here that it's going to be pater. So what's the chiddush in that? So El Rebbe says the Gemara, I did the Tana since we wanted to learn a different case in our Mishnah. Shach shaloi lishmai b'Shabbos. If you can just sort of come Pesach shaloi lishmai on Shabbos, that you can be chayiv. So Tananam is shaloi lo'ichlav. So therefore, then we also mentioned the other case, which is similar, that when you do it shaloi lo'ichlav. But you're right, shaloi lo'ichlav we knew already, and even lo'ichlav b'shaloi lo'ichlav we knew. But for the other case, which is similar of shaloi lishmai, says but he kufa lomali. The case of shaloi lishmai, why do I need that either? I also know that shaloi lishmai is puzzle, and if it's puzzle, you can be chayiv for Chil Shabbos. Or says the Gemara, mishum dekubayil leflugir b'lezer b'Yeshua. Because we wanted to have the machlekes Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, which was not when you're doing Pesach Shaloi Lishma for Shar Zvachim. When you're doing Shar Zvachim, other karbanis to be the carbon Pesach. Now we had a machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rishua if that's going to be pasul or not, and that's why I wanted to tell you all those cases. We said lo'eichlav v'shalei lo'eichlav for the case of Pesach shalal lishmai, which even that we didn't have to tell you, but we said that because of the case of shar zvachim that you're doing l'shem Pesach if that's going to be pasul or not, and that's why we said these cases over here. Now the Gemara has 3 questions regarding the halacha of the Mishnah. Amalei Rav Huna bar Chinna Lebre says, when you go in front of Zreka, I want you to ask him the following question. According to the one that says in Masechet Shabbos Daf Kavav Medal, Mekalkol bechabura. If someone inflicts a wound, he bangs somebody and there's blood that bubbles up on Shabbos for doing a kilkel. I mean, there's not fixing anything, it's not helping anything, it's just a destructive act. When you punch somebody and he gets black and blue, it's a chabura, that's a destructive act. It could be for a tikkun, but let's say he's doing it for a destructive act. That there is an opinion that holds that potter, that you're going to be potter, and that you're not chayiv for chavala on Shabbos unless you're doing a constructive. When is a black and blue mark a constructive act? Oh, when you're slaughtering, which you're fixing. Or, you're inflicting a wound in an animal because you need the blood, because you need to give it to your dog to eat the blood, whatever it is. But there is a machlekes in Masechet Shabbos, are you going to be chayiv from a kalkul b'chabur or not? The reason why is because although generally, like we said in the introduction, all makalkul not potter, but there is an opinion that since wound or fire are exceptions to this rule because they're inherently destructive, so then, even if it's a makalkul, you're going to be chayiv. But there is an opinion that says you can be potter. So in that mandam that says that mekalkal b'chabura is going to be part like all other malachas in the Torah, that you're only going to be chayiv if it's constructive, but if it's destructive, you're going to be exempt for karban chatas. So then he asks him on the halachas on 3 of the cases of our Mishnah. He says, shachta shelo lo'eichlav. So the case that we mentioned before, that when you're slaughtering the karban pesach, not for those who could eat it, which we learned in the Mishnah that you're going to be chayiv v'chatas because you did chol Shabbos because it wasn't about karban chatas. Wait a second, matikin. What did you fix? You invalidated this carbon, and you can't eat. There's nothing here that you could do over it. You can't eat it. It's not a carbon. It was totally an act of kilkul. So of course it's an usher to do that on Shabbos. But what's the chiyuv of chatas? You're not liable unless you did an act of fixing, constructive, and you did destructive. Says the Gemara, Tikkun. You know what he fixed? Is im alu that if it went up, that lo yerdu, that it's not going to come down. Meaning all carbonas that become invalidated in the Azar, in the court of the Mishnah Mizrachim that Pedal Manal tells us. If it went up on top of the Mizbeach, the sacrificial part of the sacrifice, you're not going to take it down. So since over here it only became invalidated in the Azara, meaning it was really a kosher carbon, but the guy who did the shechita did it shalei lo'eichlav, that's called a psul ba'kodesh. Such a psul is now, if the moon went up, you're not going to take it down. I mean, regular chulin you're going to take down. But this is a psul ba'kodesh, so you did gain something by the shechita that you did. Because of lo yerdu. So although it's puzzle, but therefore that's what you mechai mechatas for the shechita. Okay, second case in the Mishnah we said, shachta b'nim tzabamo. We said that if you shech the animal, it turns out it was a blemish, so chayv michayv, like we said in the Mishnah, because you should have seen. It's like you just didn't look well enough. It's not some internal problem. It's an external wound that you, blemish that you didn't see. It says, matikin. But what did you fix? The Mishnah over there teaches that im olu yerdu, regarding a blemish, if it went up, you have to take it down because that's not psul ba'kodesh. It didn't become problematic here in the Azara. This was when it was at home in the farm, it had this blemish. So that's something that imolu yerdu. So what did you fix over here by doing the shechita? So to be chayiv achatas for the malacha of chavala. Says Gemara, you know what? Tikin bedukin sheba'ayin. You did something constructive when it's a cataract in the eye. By a korban, it's a blemish. As the pasuk says, make a chaval, eidakle taval be'enoi. It has a cataract or some type of blemish in the eye. Valim Rabbi Kiva. Dama, he says, imolu lo yerdu. Kiva is brought him set zvachim. He says, he validates by a blemish that im olufa went up. Now the Gemara there explains, Rabbi Kiva didn't say this halacha only regarding a cataract in the eye. Because since initially it's valid by bird karbanas, it's not a psul. So by animal karbanas, b'di'evid im olu lo yerdu. So if we're going in Rabbi Kiva, in the cataracts, where although a blemish is something that generally im olu yerdu, by the cataract, that blemish will be im olu lo yerdu. And according to him, that's what you were masakin when you had the animal that you slaughtered that had a blemish, that you still fix something that it's going to be imolu yerdu according to Rabbi Kiva. Okay, case number 3 in the Mishnah. We said shachta b'nim tzatreifa b'seisu. We said, let's say you slaughtered the animal, the korban pesach. Turns out you're doing your bedikis, you're going through to see if it's glat, you're going through the lungs. It turns out it's a treifa, but it was a concealed mortal defect. It was internal defect. So potter, you're exempt, like we said, because what were you supposed to do? You didn't know that it was a treifa, but the inference is habegoli chayiv. But let's say it was a treifa that it was revealed. You could have seen it. Some type of mortal defect. It was a hole in its neck or something like that. You could have seen that it's a treifa, or through its skull or something like that. So the question is, matikin, what did you fix? Because treifa also, the Gemara says over there, that if also tered, if it went up, it has to come down. So what were you doing constructively by your act of chavala of shchita? If it's tered, there's nothing that you gain. Says Gemara, tikin lahitzi, you know what? It was constructive, that it corrected. It removes through the shchita mideiden vela. Now, of course, you can't eat this, but it's not going to have a tumah of nevela, because you did shchita. So that's what it was masakin. It was constructive in the sense that it doesn't have the tumah of nevela. But the Gemara continues asking, Maskala Ravina. Ravina asks, Hadatanya. We learned in the Brisa. Hasheichet chatas, if someone slaughters a chatas, which the Gemara in Shechita School in the second paragraph explains why do you have to say chatas specifically. It sounds like any carbon, but be that as it may, if you slaughter a carbon chatas, bis Shabbos, on Shabbos, b'chutz, out of the azara, l'avodah zara, for idolatry, so chayiv ala gimel chatas. You're going to be liable for 3 karbanas of a chatas that you did wrong. First of all, you mechal Shabbos. Second of all, you did avodah zara. And third of all, you did shchuti chutz b'azara. You did slaughtering of a carbon out of the azara. Okay, but the question is, matikin, what did you do constructive over here? As Rashi explains, you didn't even remove it from the velo. Why not? Why not? There's shchita. Shchita removes it from the velo. No, because takrepus of a zara, when you sacrifice something for idolatry, that contaminated even ba'oil. It's a severe level of tumah. So you didn't remove it from any tumah. So what you do for tikkun over here that you can be chayv for chil Shabbos? So then Rabbi Shloimy says, you know what? For the bnei noyach, for non-Jews, if they're going to eat it, they're not going to get killed, because they're also one of the Shem Mitzvah bnei noyach is not to eat an Eiva Menachai. It's not a limb from a living creature because it was slaughtered. It's dead. So therefore, that's what you gain when you did the shchita, that you removed from Eiva Menachai, and then you did something constructive, then you be chayv for the Chil Shabbos and Chavala on Shabbos. You did something constructive. That's what it would be a live animal. So that shchita, that it was masakin, that part. Nothing more continues with the halacha of our Mishnah. Shachtai, if you slaughtered the animal, V'noida, this was the last halacha of the Mishnah. V'noida v'chulu, and you find out that shemashchu habayil masyadam. There was no more owners on this carbon pesach. They already removed it. Everyone went on to the chabura. Or shemesu, the owners died. Or shenimah, they became tamei. So the Mishnah says it's a puzzle. It's going to be a puzzle because there was no owners. There's nothing. It wasn't a valid carbon. Now the kohen does not have to bring a carbon chatas. The Mishnah said because it was nice. He didn't have to know. Now the Gemara is going to introduce a teaching that's going to relate back to the halacha of our Mishnah, and it is a little bit complicated, but the halacha goes like this. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. It says, Asham shenitik l're'iyah. There's a bunch of new concepts that's very kachim-like, so it's like one of those you just have to help cup, you have to just hold on a little. The carbon asham that was sent out to graze, what are we talking about? So Rashi gives us some background. If the owner of the carbon asham dies, or he got it home with some other carbon, so regarding chatas and asham, you're limited what you could do. Because the other karbanas, you could bring it as an adav. Asham and chatas cannot be brought as an adav. So once you get an atonement with some other carbon, there's nothing really you could do with this animal. So what do you do? So by chatas, there's halacha l'meshmesina, the Gemara brings a timur daf chafal from a base, that has to be left to die. Now, but by asham, we have halacha l'meshmesina, as the Gemara says within Daf Yomi, kol shemachatas mesa, wherever by the carbon chatas is going to die, but asham raya. By the asham, by the guilt offering carbon, you let it go out to graze. Now, if it goes and it goes out and goes to graze and you put it out into the pasture and it develops a blemish, then you could redeem it because a blemished kodshim you could then redeem, and then you use it for chulin. And the halacha is that all those karbanos that go out to be roya, their monetary value is used for an adava. Now, what's an adava? You have 6 what's called shefaras, where these boxes they're in the base of mikdash, and on those boxes are written adava. And they would put all the leftover monies, like in this case of the asham that went out to graze, of the chatois and ashamais, and they bring from it what's called the kayetz hamizbeach, which is the dessert of the mizbeach. But they would bring these karbanas that were when the mizbeach was idle and wasn't doing anything. So they would bring these karbanas, and the meat would go to Hashem, and the skins would go to the Kahanim, as the Gemara says in Tumor Daf Gimel days. Now, that's the background to this case. Now, this Asham, what we're talking about is he didn't wait till develop a blemish. Rather, the moment he sent it out to graze, v'shachto istam. So this Asham, really what you're supposed to do is, you send it out to graze, they're just going out to pasture, it develops a blemish, okay, it becomes kachim shenifsel, then you can redeem it, and you could go ahead and sell it, and then you could use its monies for the kites of his bath. They didn't do that. He sent it out to graze, and then he goes, you know what, v'shachto istam, he goes and he slaughters it without specifying. So and that says, Rav, kosher la'ayla. So, this carbon is fit to be used as the kites on mizbeach, which was anyways what ultimately the monetary value was going to be used, which you were going to sell that asham when it developed the blemish, and those monies you were going to put into that box they would use to buy an oil of a kite on mizbeach. So you didn't do that. You took this exact asham that you sent out to graze and you slaughtered in the azara without saying anything, without specifying. That's going to be kosher as the oil, which anyways the monies would have been used to buy the oil. That was the halacha of Rav. Now, it says the Gemara, obviously Rav holds, loy by akira. You don't need to do akira, meaning, since ultimately the purpose of this was going to be as an oila, so you don't have to uproot the title of asham from it. What do you mean, this is an asham? It's an asham that you can't use anymore because the owner, let's say, got atonement somewhere else, but it's an asham. So how can you use it as an oila? Obviously, you don't have to do akira. I don't have to uproot it from an asham. It's a shoinish the asham. It's a shoin glach an oila. It's already an oila. Because that's what it's going to be anyways at the end of the day. So I don't have to uproot it. Because I didn't uproot it. I just shechted its stam. And it's going to be kosher as an oila. That was Rav's teaching. In fact, the Gemara asks, if that's the case, so kiloi nitiknami. So then why did you go even a bigger chiddush? Then even if it wasn't removed to go out to graze, just say the moment the guy got atonement with another carbon, we could then presume that it's going to be used for the kites on mizbeach, for the oilos that were brought when the mizbeach was idle, even before you sent out to graze. Why do you have to tell me that, you sent it out to graze, and then he took it and he slaughtered to be kosher idle? Even before that, it's automatically, you don't need to have akira. Says the Gemara, no. Because Gezeira, there's a rabbinic decree of la'acha kapara, that after the guy got atonement with some other asham, atu lefnei kapara, because of before he got atonement. Because if he didn't have atonement yet, then this animal is presumed to be as an asham. Now, but when you did nituk, when you sent it out to graze, then it's not going to be confused with a regular asham. Meaning, if we let you do it when you had kapara, it's like, how do you know? It's still home over here. It's still tied to the bed over here. I don't know. He got atonement with some other one. You send it out to the farm. You send it out to graze. That's not going to come to be confused. Now, but then says the Gemara, where do you get this idea from? Such an interesting concept that you make a gezerah of la'acha kapara atu lefnei kapara. So the Gemara is going to give a comparison, which is not really the same exact case, but you'll see the concept of gezerah of acha kapara atu lefnei kapara. This is not like the Mishnah said this tomorrow. Mishnah says ashram shemesu bolo. Again, these are different concepts, they're cultural concepts. So if you have an asham that the owner died, right? What do you do with that asham? The owner's dead. Can't bring it as an adava. Oishin is kababayla. Well, let's say the owner's got atonement with some other one. They couldn't find it, so they just decided to bring another one. And then boom, here's the animal, it's back again. So the owner got atonement already with some other carbon. So what do? So there's a few different opinions. The Tanakhama says, Yira ad sheyistayv, so you let the animal go out to graze until it develops a blemish. Okay, then mimacher, you'll sell it. You'll allow to sell kachim shenifsel. It became invalid. And then you go and you put the monies and you put into the shefers, to these boxes, which are the donations of the leftovers, and from that is what they used to buy the kites in his bath. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer, he says, no, there's nothing you can do. You have to let it die. Now, as Rashi explains, because Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is brought often in Masechta Zvachim, he made asham just like chatas for all areas. As the pasuk says, because then kechatas ka'asham, they're the same exact. Same thing we're going to shalai l'shma. So we're going to chatas that the blood went inside the heichel. The same thing for the asham. As the burden is Daf Yomi. So he says, just like we have the halacha we've seen that the chatas has to die, the asham has to die. There's no grazing over here. Fine. Third opinion, sure. He says, no, you macher. What you do is, after the asham develops a blemish, you sell it. And when it's proceeds with the monies, you bring a carbon oila as an adava for himself, because as Rashi brings in Masechtas Tamura, the Gemara says, wait a second, Nedava is also an oila. So what's Rabbi Shua saying different than the Tanna Kama? They're both saying the same thing. No, it's not. Because when it's like Rabbi Shua that he's bringing it for his own obligation, so then he does smicha, he leans on the animal, and then when he shefts it, and then the nesachim come from his own monies, from his own pockets. In contrast, according to Tanna Kama, when this brought as an adava for the tzibur, then he doesn't do smicha, it's not his korban. So there are differences between Rabbi Shua and the Tanna Kama. Okay, but the main thing is what we're going to say right now. What did Rabbi Shua say? You sell it, and with its proceeds you bring a korban ayla. Says the Gemara, the diuk, the inference is bedam of it. Okay, with the proceeds, with the monies, you bring a korban ayla. Aval gufay loy, but what? But the animal itself, we're not saying you should sacrifice it as a korban ayla. What do you mean? Even though this person himself, according to Rabbi Shua, it's not even like the Tanna Kama that you bring an ayla for the tzibur. According to Rabbi Shua, the guy himself is bringing ayla. So why did you just bring this animal itself as the ayla? No, why not? Because the gazalacha kapara, obviously see, because we're making gezerah that even though he had an atonement with another animal, but on to lifnei kapara. If we let him go ahead right now and bring this asham as an ayla, it's going to cause to make a mistake. Why? Because let's say he's going to have to bring an ayla before he got atonement with another animal. He's going to say, you know what? I can use this animal. I'll bring a different one for an asham. No, that's not it. You can't do that. You can't change a carbon to bring it as another carbon as long as it's still designated for what you're supposed to bring it for. If we let you use this asham, once you got a kapar with another animal as an ayla, you might decide to do it before kapara also. It looks the same to a person. Okay, ich bring them and we can bring a andere later. Let me take this as the ayla. Take this as the ayla. I'll bring a different asham. No, that's an asham. You don't have kapara or anything else. You bring this asham as an ayla, you're doing it shalei lishma. That's going to be psul. So therefore, that's why we're telling you that what you have to do is you have a bedam of ayla. Because we're geyser acha kapara atu lefnei kapara shema. That's the raya for this concept that we make such a gzeira, and that's the reason for why Rav, it's not difficult why he says that this ashram you have to be manatik at l're'iyah, you have to go out to graze and only then shut this up to be kashal ayla. Because before nitik, no, then we're not going to. Because even though it's acha kapara, we're geyser lefnei kapara. But yes, if you're manatik l're'iyah, but when you're into graze and you slaughter it stam, it's going to be kashal as ayla because anyways it's going to be, and you don't need to have an akira. Okay. So we just answered a secondary question on Rav. Now we're going to ask on his primary halach itself. Rav Huna, who Rav Huna had said over in the name of Rav that you don't need to do an akira when you're manatik l're'iyah, meaning if you have an asha, which is an asha, but the guy got a kapara somewhere else. So what do? So when it goes out to graze and no blemish, and you slaughter it without stam, you didn't say you're doing it as an ayla. You shechted stam, it's going to be kosher as an ayla. How? You don't need akira. That was what we said, that you're seeing the primary halach from Rav. You don't have to uproot and say, okay, it's no more asham, it's an ayla. No, it automatically is an ayla because it's not an asham anymore. So there was the inference we made from that teacher, and that's what we're going to ask now from the following brisa. Says the brisa, shachtai, you slaughter the carbon pesach, like we say in our Mishnah. And this actually, we're asking from our Mishnah now. This is why we introduced this halach. It's come back to the halach of the Arba Mishnah. We said these cases, and you find out that the owner already, there's no more owners over here. They already went to another chabura. Or the guy died, or they became tamei. So we said in the Mishnah that potter, that you're going to be potter. And the reason why you're going to be potter is because you didn't know any better. You didn't have to know. Now, it's between them and base. Now, the thing is, between Allah. Now we learned on this in a brisa that says that b'chol ki ha'gavna. Now, if this happened during a weekday, meaning in our Mishnah, we were coming to tell you this halacha as it relates to Shabbos. We wanted to tell you, you're not going to be chayv v'chil Shabbos, you didn't have to know. Okay, you're knowing this, fine. It's a possible carbon, but you're not chayv v'chil. Now, in the brisa that clarifies some of the things that are not mentioned explicitly in the Mishnah, it says that this is what happened in a weekday, which that the owners had withdrawn their hands, and if it's a carbon possible because there's no bailam. Since you could burn it, because it's a weekday, you sarf miyad. This is the important concept over here. You're going to burn it right away. What's the chiddush in burning it right away? I mean, a carbon puzzle, you burn it. What are you going to do with it, right? No. The chiddush is you don't have to wait for the following day Why would you have to wait for the following day? That's called ibur tzura, which means to say that the form changed, meaning it gets fashimelt. You leave it over, but it changes its form and gets ruined. You don't have to. Now, although Meiser HaPesach, although the leftover of a korban Pesach is brought as a shlamim, and if this person would slaughter this korban Pesach, Shemeisu Bala, which is the case our Mishnah is discussing, that the owner died, if he would have brought it as a shlamim, it would have been kosher. But this is the main point of it. But now that he didn't uproot it from being a Pesach, he just brought it as a Pesach, he slaughtered stam, which was stam lishma for the korban Pesach. You're going to burn it right away because it's a Pesach that was slaughtered shaloi l'mnuyav. So therefore it's a korban pasul. Therefore you're going to burn it right away. So the Gemara asks like this: if you say that generally we presume that the animal is going to be as a shlamim like all Meiser Pesach, that boyakira, that you need to go ahead and uproot it from Pesach to be the shlamim when it's a leftover of a Pesach or when it's not a valid Pesach. When you can't bring it as Pesach anymore, it automatically becomes Meiser Pesach. But yet you have to go ahead and uproot and make it as long as you didn't do the akira. It's still considered Pesach, so we can understand Hi Pesachu. So there's a korban Pesach. That's why you burn it right away, and you don't need ibetur. You know why? Because the kivin the less violent, since there's no owners anymore because they were mashchi yideyim. Have a psulei big gufa, and that's the main point over here. So it's an intrinsic invalidation because it was slaughtered. If there's a problem with this korban itself, I get it. Well, you burn it right away. Eliyam, this is the question that we can ask now in Rav. But if you say like the way Rav says the name of Rav, that loy boyakira, you don't have to uproot it. It goes right away. You told me by the asham that when you shachted stam, yeah, it's an oila. But you never took it, you never said, it's not a asham, it's an oila. Yeah, you don't need that. You don't have to uproot it. It's automatic. So then, over here, that means by the Pesach, once the owners were mashri yidayim, once they stopped being the owners, guess what? It's not a Pesach anymore. It's a shlamim. So then, Merei Shabbalei Shlamim means automatically in the beginning it became a shlamim. So then, psulei meshumai. So if it's a shlamim, so what is the psul over here that you're shechting? Shaloi l'nuyav, shaloi l'oichel. There's no such halacha regarding shlamim. It doesn't have to be menuyav and oichlim. Must be mishum davacher. It must have been because of a different reason it's possible. Why is it possible? Because shachali achar tomash abein abayim. You know what the problem is? When you shech the korban Pesach, you shech the korban Pesach after the daily sacrifice in the evening, like the Gemara said in Daf Yomi base. Now, if it's not a Pesach anymore, it's a shlamim. A shlam's not allowed to be brought after tomash abein abayim. You're over on the asay of hashlama, which we said Allah hashlam kol gavan zkulam cannot be brought after tomash abein abayim. That's what was the puzzle when you did this korban Pesach, Shalom Nuyev, not a Pesach, it's a Shlamim. So what's the psul? Oh, because they have to Tomash Ben Abayim. Well then if that's the case, Ibatzur boy. Why is the Brisa telling me then that the halach is Yitzarf Miyad, you burn it right away? You don't burn it right away. You have to leave it overnight. That's how I learned the Brisa. Zakal, this is the rule. Kol Shabsula Begufay, when you have an intrinsic invalidation, we say there's a problem with the korban itself. For example, you had a machshava pigul, or it's left over nicer, or it's tamei, or left the area, the perimeter it's allowed to be. Then you serve me out. Then you burn it right away, and you don't have to wait because it's intrinsic psul, and it's something that's appropriate to be burned. But let's say it's bidam, let's say a problem in the blood of the bayim or the owners. For example, let's say the blood was spilled out, or for example, let's say it was a pesach that the owner died, or it became tamei after the blood was thrown. Where now it is a valid korban pesach. It's just there's a technicality here that there's no one to eat it. Then the halach is tubatzurasai. You have to wait until its form of the meat changes and deteriorates. You know why? Because since its problem is not so severe, you're not allowed to disgrace a kosher by burning it. Now, when you do ibetzura, which is a psul of lina, leaving overnight, so then that becomes a psul b'kufay of lina, and then you can go out and you burn it. So then b'yatz lebeis asreifa. So only overnight you leave it and then it goes to be burned. So now, according to Rav Rab, that you're telling me that you don't need to have akira, that means to say this case is the Mishnah that the Bryce is explaining that you serve miyad is incorrect, because you're telling me it's not a Pesach that was shachted shaloi l'nuyev, which that would be psul b'gufay. It's really a shlamim that was slaughtered after Tomash Ben Abayim, which is a secondary psul, not a psul b'gufay. And there shouldn't be served miyad. There should be tu b'tzurasai. So how do we understand the halacha the Bryce based on Rav Marav that you don't have to have akira? So El Gemara says you're right. You got me. Loi Tema, don't say we have to switch to halacha. You're right. Don't say in the teaching of Rav that shachtoi stam, that if you slaughtered unspecified, kashal shum oila, then valid as an oila, which that we had inferred that must mean to say that you don't need akira. You didn't say anything. and automatically, becomes another poof, because you don't need to do akira. No, you have to amend it, you're right. Shachtel, you have to hold on to your seat over here, because we're going to go back to the other one, so it's like a roller coaster. You thought you were over that one, there were other ones that you're getting a bigger one. So, Shachtel Shum Oil, you're right. We're talking about Rav's teaching was, if you take this asham, shenitik l're'iyah, that went out to graze, the owner got atonement somewhere else, and you slaughter as an oil, that's going to be kosher. That's the case of Rav, not the shach they stop. You have to do the shach l'shem oil. So now the Gemara said, wait a second. Almost obviously you see the boy akira, that you have to go ahead and do akira. Because if you didn't need akira, then shach this would be enough. Why are you saying that you have to do it l'shem oil? Oh, you have to be oiker, you have to uproot it? So then the Gemara asks a different question. That he says we brought this in Talmud Nishcha Daf Samadam Daf. By the brisa that says over there that Pesach needs akira. So Nizrakum Mipicha Bur Vami. So they all said together in unison that if the halacha that the Karban Pesach needs to have akira was going to show you Bailam Tmei Mason, was specifically the owners were tummy from coming in contact with a dead person. V'nidach the Pesach Shein, and they're getting pushed off to the second Pesach. Over there is where you need to have akira, because of course you're going to use it as a Karban Pesach. Although generally Moshe Pesach is shlamim, that's Pesach is not going to be a shlamim. In a month from now we're going to bring Karban Pesach. I'm going to have to find a new Karban Pesach. I'm like, I just bring in a chodesh for that. So then if you want to use it as something else, you have to do the akira, because we're presuming you're going to keep it as Karban Pesach. As the Gemara says, Hayu the boy akira. Only over there do we see from Rabbi Bar Gamda that you have to do akira. But in general, some other Karban Pesach, which is not presumed that you can use as Pesach Sheni, obviously, loy by akira, that you don't have to do akira, because that's what you tell me. Only over there you have to do akira, because it's not stam leftover Pesach. We're going to use it. You know, like they say, oh, you don't need this anymore. Hello, we're using it for the next simcha. No, I can take these flowers. I can take these flowers. No, we're using it in an hour from now. We're still going to use it. So that's what you tell me that you need akira. But in general, I mean, say you wouldn't need akira. So Michael Lemmer, what are you going to say? In other words, that would mean, based on the interpretation of the new interpretation of Rav, would be refuting that teaching, because our brisa says Yisarf Miyad. And we just explained, what do you see from there? That, and that's what we have to resolve for Rav also. Obviously, because you need to have akira, but the Rabbi Gamda said that you don't need to do akira. You only need to do akira by Tamei Mason, which they're going to use on the Pesach Sheni. In other words, we resolved for Rav, and we changed Rav's teaching. We said, oh, you're right. You have to say, based on our Mishnah, that you need an akira. Problem is, boarding with Rabbi Gamda. According to him, he's clearly that you don't need to do an akira. And so what is he going to do with the halacha of the Mishnah? Our Mishnah contradicts him too. Our Mishnah seems to say clearly that if you're saying you surf miyad, that it's a psul b'gufay, it must mean because you need an akira, and that's why it's still called Pesach. Remember, the psul was because you did it shaloi l'shem oichle l'shem l'shem nuyev. Because if you hold loy by akira, it's a shlam, and the psul is only of hashlama, which is not a psul b'gufay, and therefore you wouldn't be surf miyad. You would have to keep it surasa. So El Rav Huna Bar Yishuv, we're back to where we were before. No, you're right. Truth is the way Rav had said, that if you shecht, it's the ashur shenitik l'riyah, it's going to be kosher as an oil. Because since it's going to be ultimately used as an oil, we could presume that it's as an oil. And even though it started as an asham, you're right. If you shecht it stam, it'll be kosher as oil. So to Ma'aser Pesach, the case of our Mishnah, the leftovers of the Pesach, since it's ultimately going to be used as a shlamim, so stam, if you're going to shecht it, it's going to be a shlam. But then Hacha will be here in the brisa that's explained all over the Mishnah. That said that if you shafted it, that there's no bailim, or that there became, tell me all these other cases that you can burn it right away. Why burn it right away? Why don't we burn it right away? If it's a shlamim, like we said, you should have to do ibut tzurasa. So that's what the Gemara is saying. No, it's not because you need an akira and that it's still a Karban Pesach. Rather, it's because mavai skin. What are we talking about over here? You had separated this Karban Pesach before noon. So when Chatzos came around on Erev Pesach, Chatzos established it, which is the time of the Shechita, that it was what's called Nira. It was eligible to bring it to Karban Pesach. Now, Umeisu Bailam Acha Chatzos. And the owner died after noon, which therefore became rejected from a Karban Pesach, because if there's no Bailam, it's not a Karban Pesach anymore. Oh, so now it's not going to be eligible to be anymore, even as a Karban Shlama. You know why? The Havale Nidav and Nidcha, this is what's called Halacha, that it was eligible, and then it was ineligible. Whatever is eligible than ineligible, so it's not going to be any more eligible at all. So wait a second, as Rashi addresses, says, well, then what's the halacha of Moisar Pesach, that the leftovers of Pesach, Achar Pesach, is brought as a shlamim? That, for example, was lost before Chatzos, and was found after the Pesach was already slaughtered, meaning some other Pesach, where Chatzos never made it and established. It was never, quote, nira for the Shchitas Pesach. It was only found after that Zman. That's when Moisar Pesach is brought as a shlamim. But over here that we're talking about, that the owner was eligible at one point and then ineligible, it's not going to be brought as a shlam anymore. And that's why we're going to say it's Yisarf Miyad, because it's totally possible as a carbon. It can't be brought at all. So now the Gemara asks on that and says, wait a second. Midu time el Rav? What do you mean? This whole answer we're trying to answer is for Rav. And for the B'chia Bar Gamda, but for Rav also, Rav had said, and that's what we're trying to explain for Rav Huna's version of Rav, that you don't need Akira. Because that's what Rav's teaching was. Rav had said that the Asham Shanitik Li'iyah B'Shachti Stam, it's going to be kosher, that you see from there, that Loi Boy Akira, it's automatically as an Oilam. Now, Ha'amar Rav, but Rav, and that we're trying to say, oh, you're right, our Mishnah doesn't contradict that, our Bryce says it's a miyad, because Nida Benitcha. Problem is, Ha'amar Rav, this answer you're giving doesn't go well for Rav. Because Rav says in the second parak, in Yuma, in Parak Shnei Sid in Yuma, that Balechayim in the Dachin, living creatures do not become rejected. Rejected, what's called nitche, ineligible, is only in the blood or in the owners. For example, let's say in Masechtas Yuma, where it's talking about the Shnei Se'idim, the two he-goats that are brought on Yom Kippurim. So the Sar Lashem, let's say, was slaughtered. Before you sprayed the blood, the other one, the Sar Lazazel, the Mishtalech, died. Then you have to spill out the blood. But as long as the animal is still alive, even if, let's say, the other twin carbon, something happened to it, it doesn't become invalidated because of nitche. So how are you telling me this halacha to resolve for Rav? To explain the halacha in the Mishnah of Yisarf Miyad, because it was nidav and nitche. It's not a good answer for Rav. Rav doesn't hold it was nidav and nitche, because there's no nitche by Balichayim. It was alive. So that's not a good approach for Rav. So Elam Rav Papa, so Rav Papa says, you're right. Okay, we're still not rejecting Rav. We're still holding the way Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, that you don't need to do Akira, and it automatically is a shlamim. So then we're back to the question, so why did the Brisa say, B'chol Yisarf Miyad, that if this happened during the weekday, that you did it shaloi, without the bailam there, shenim shchu bailam midayim, that you burn it right away, which that's the whole question we're asking. Seemingly that's a shlamim, and that's not a psul b'gufay. You know who Hamani, who is the town of the Mishnah? It's Rebbe Eliezer. It's going like Rebbe Eliezer. And you know what the problem is? You're right, it's a shlamim. But we're talking about that you slaughtered it to be as a korban pesach. Because again, remember, you think it's a korban pesach. It really is a shlamim, because you don't need akida, and it's automatically a shlamim. But you didn't know that the ba'al minim shchuyidei. So you're slaughtering to become pesach. The Eliezer goes according to the Pindar. He says in Talmud Nishcha Daf Selach Beis and Beis. He says not only is when you do a pesach l'shaloi l'shma, did we say that according to everyone, it's going to be a psul begufa. It's a totally pasul like chatas. But Rabbi Eliezer has a chiddush. He was v'chein hashechet acher. If you slaughter other karbans like a shlamim, which is what this carbon really is, l'shem pesach as a pesach, which is what you think it is, what you're doing it for, pasul, it's actually going to be pasul. It's an intrinsic invalidation, and you get burned right away because it's like a chata shanicha shleshma and the pesach shanicha, which is not kosher like other karbanas, just wasn't all levan shem chayva. It's totally invalid. So it's going like a Rabbi Eliezer. That's what he served me on. Yes, it's a shlamim. Wait, it's shlamim. Then what's the psul? Shleshma in the shlamim is not a psul b'gufa. Yes, it is like a Rabbi Eliezer. If you do it on Erev Pesach, l'shem Pesach. Of some other carbon, that's a psul b'gufay, and then you serve me out. So he's going, wait a second, that also doesn't work out. If you're Rabbi Eliezer, he was going to Rabbi Eliezer, then why did we say in the Brisa that explains the Mishnah that when the Bailam die, that you're going to be potter, chatas nami mechayev, you should also be chayev chatas because of the Isser Shabbos. Why? The lesson of Rabbi Eliezer does not hold to this concept of Toy B'dvar Mitzvah potter. If you recall from the previous dafim that we had this machlekes of Eliezer, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Kiva, they hold Tabid Var Mitzvah. If you made an error as you're trying to perform a mitzvah, the Asay Mitzvah, then you can be potter. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold to that whole concept. You can be a shoygig, you can be chayv chatas. So even if you didn't know, you can be chayv chatas. So it can't be Rabbi Eliezer. Because even if that's going to resolve the part about why it's a psul b'guf and you sort of miyad, that's not going to help us understand why you can be potter from a chatas to be chayv chatas. So Ella rather says the Gemara, Rabbi Yisuf, the son of Rav Salah Chasida, he interpreted in front of Rav Papa that Haman, you know what's the Tana of the Mishnah? It's Yisuf ben Chanoihi. The Tana of the Mishnah says this Zvachim. Yisuf ben Chanoihi, he says, Hanishchatim l'shem Pesach or l'shem Chatas psul. If you slaughter some other carbon, which generally if you slaughter some other carbon, shaloi l'shma, it's a kosher carbon. But his chiddush is similar to Rabbi Eliezer, that if you slaughtered for some other carbon, that in itself, if you did that carbon shaloi l'shma would be possible. So then that carbon also. So if you slaughter some other carbon, let's say a shlamim, to be a chatas or to be a pesach on the pesach, it's going to be possible. Just like Rabbi Eliezer. Now Alma, so you see the psula begufi. You see holds like Rabbi Eliezer on this idea that shlamim l'shem pesach is an intrinsic validation. Okay, now we understand that part of the halacha. That's bring it right away. Like Rabbi Eliezer. The only problem is, Rabbi Eliezer was also like that, but we have the other thing, and that's what we're saying. Regarding the exemption of when you're talking about mitzvah, and that's Sabalor, Yisuf ben Chanoi holds, shiur, like that you're going to be potter. So therefore, he's going to be the time of the Mishnah. Okay, that was one approach to resolve Rav. Now the Gemara gives another approach to explain this of Rav. Rav Yomi, he says that actually Rav the Amma, which the Gemara ultimately is going to reject this answer, and you're going to have to say like this first answer we just said, but the Gemara wants to say another approach. Rav the Amma, Rav that said previously that you don't need to have an akira, he doesn't hold like this Tana, the Brisa that says that it happens during the week, you're going to burn it right away. Rather, he holds like a different Tana that holds that you need a B'tzura. In other words, we're asking from a Tana on Rav, saying, hey, wait a second. The Brisa says that you start off miyad. That's not like you. Because according to you, again, it's a shlamim, and if it's a shlamim, it's not a psul b'gufa. It was shechted after the Torah Shabbat Abayim. So why be served miyad? So the first approach, the Gemara resolved it with that Tana. Now the Gemara saying, what are you asking on Rav? It's obviously machlokes tanoim. I'm going to show you a Tana that holds you need a b'tzura, and that's like Rav, because not a psul b'gufa. He doesn't hold like this Tana. Who's this Tana? Rav says, the Tana learned the price. He says, if Yeshua is by Yom. If let's say this time in the day that this guy who slaughtered this carbon pesach on Shabbos, that he could have checked, laid that to know in Mashrum Bayal Mesidayim. He could have known. In the Mishnah we said he's pots, it's ainus because how could he have known? But let's say he could have known. He could have checked to see if the owner's already removed himself from the registry of this carbon. Or he could have found out if that they died. Or that they became tamei, and he didn't inquire. Oh, so then you're not a Talmud mitzvah. You're a shaygig. You didn't do it deliberately, but it's an inadvertent sin. So chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. Like Rashi says, a shaygig more than a ta'ah is something that's a little bit closer to being negligent. You didn't do it deliberately. You don't want to do that, but you couldn't check to see if they died or they removed themselves. They're going to be chayiv achatas. But to ubetzurasai. Now, if it happened during the weekday, you would have to let it stay overnight. Like Rashi said, I know talking about a weekday. Maybe it's on Shabbos, like we're saying. No. On Shabbos, you didn't have to save it because Shabbos anybody's not going to burn it, and the next day is Yom Tov, you're not going to burn it then either. So obviously, if we're saying that you have to leave it overnight, it means to say if it happened on a weekday, you would leave it overnight because you never burn pasla kachim on Shabbos. So you leave it overnight, and then the Yitzhak basically say, but then it goes out to be burned. Says the Gemara, my time. What's the reason that you need to have ibetzura? Why isn't it a psul b'gufay? La mishum deloy boy akira. Isn't it because that you don't need to do akira? And over here, it was slaughtered stam. But wait a second. It's a shlamim that's kosher. It just was slaughtered after the tamid. And because it's a psul nachmas dover acher, that's why we're saying over here that it's going to have to do ibetzura because you don't need akira. So it's automatically a shlamim. And it's a shlamim, it's just not a psul gufay. Because if it was a pesach, then it would be a psul ba'atzim. So you should burn it right away. So you see, they always like because it was psul gufay, which is what a pesach is. When you do it when the owner died and became tamei, what's the halacha? You burn it right away. It's not saying you don't burn it right away. You leave it overnight. Why leave it overnight? Oh, obviously because it was a shlamim. That the psul is only that it was slaughtered after Torah Shabbat Abayim, and that's why you do ibetzura, like Rav. Says no, it's not a raya. Where do you get this from? Dilma maybe you really need akira, not like Rav. And yes, it's still a carbon pesach and it's a psul b'gufay. So why do you need ibetzura? I'll tell you for a different reason. Because Rabbi Shmuel, the Savalav, Ketana, the Bei Rabbi Baravua, Dama, that he says, I feel a pigel. We quoted this previously in this Masechta, that even pigel, which is a psul b'gufay, no greater invalidation animal than pigel, Nami by Ibitzur, even they needed to be left out overnight. The oven of Minaisi learns that exer shavim Naisa, which left out overnight, and all the by Pigel also, which it says oven has to be left out overnight. That even if Psuba Kufa like Pigel needs Ibitzur, so over here, even though it's an intrinsic validation because of Pesach, because not like Rav, maybe you still would have to leave it overnight. And the Gemara proves the point. The Ilay Tamachi, if you don't say that, the reason why is because this Tana holds that even a Psula Guf needs Ibitzur, rather because you want to say like Rav, that it doesn't need Akira, and therefore it's a Shlamim, and therefore it's not Psula Gufa, and that's when you need Ibitzura. But that would only work for 2 of the 3 cases. If the owner died, or if he got atonement somewhere else. But Nitmu Bailim, regarding the 3rd case of the owners became Tamei, what are you going to say over there? Is it possible to say that when the owner became Tamei, that you don't have to do an Akira to go ahead and make it into a Shlamim? Havadi by Akira. There we know you have to do an Akira. Because he said, the whole Chabur said that could going to buy them Tamei Maze. Oh, when the owners are Tamei Maze, okay, so if they were just Tamei, they didn't die, get atonement somewhere else. Meaning come Pesach somewhere else. Then they're going to go ahead and they're going to bring it to Pesach Sheni. So they would presume that it's going to be a Pesach because you're bringing a month from now. And even so, Rabbi Shmuel is telling us that Oisha Nitmu, that you still need to have a Ibutzura. Why do you need Ibutzura? There, everyone agrees in there over there that Boy Akira. So then it's not a Shlamim. Then it is a Pesach. Then it is intrinsic validation. Then it should be Yisarf Miyad. Machladrat is clear, you're right. The reason Rabbi Shmuel is because he holds that even a Psula Guf needs Ibutzura. And it's not a Raya Torah. And the time the Brisa that said Yisarf Miyad holds that you don't need Ibutzura, and if you burn it right away. So then if you're going to try to resolve Rav, that Brisa shouldn't be difficult for him, because you can't say that Rabbi Shmuel is like him, so you have to say, like we answered previously, that the Psula Guf, when the owner dies, or if they were Mashchi Yedeyim, is because when you shechted to be a Karban Pesach, it's really a Shlamim. When you didn't do Akira, like Rav, because you don't need Akira. So it's a Shlamim they do L'Shem Pesach. Oh, that's a Psula Guf. Why is that Psula Guf? It's a Shlamim. Because it's like Yosef ben Chanoi, who he holds that even if you do a Shlamim, which is what it is, automatically, because you don't need Akira like Rav, L'Shem Pesach, it is a Psula Guf, and then you bring it right away. Hanel Achil Dvarim, we shall return to the 6th paragraph of Seth Pesach, Dvarim, we spoke about primarily that of the Karban Pesach on Shabbos, and that of the Chagigah. So we're going to discuss in today's Daf, in Psachim, Daf Ayin Gimel, here. We said that this was written in the Mishnah, that if you do it Shachta Shaloi L'Shmoy on Shabbos, what do you need that for? Of course, if it's possible, you can be Chai for Shabbos. We said we need it to tell the Machlekes of Lezer, and you be sure by Shabbos Vacham, when you do that L'Shem Pesach, if that's going to be possible or not, to be Chai on Shabbos or not. Then we said, according to the one who holds, Mekalkal B'Chabura is Pater. So that means that you're only going to be Chayiv if you do ticket. So all these cases in the Mishnah, when you're Mekalkal, because it's not a valid carbon, why are you Chayiv Achatas? So we went through one by one. They said, if you did it Shlei Lo Eichlov, what you fix? You fix that Im Olu Lo Yerdu. Because it's still what's called Psula B'Kodesh. The validation was in the Azara. You don't have to take it down, so you fix that. That was constructive. If you sheft it and it turns out to be a Balmum, what you fix over there, the halacha generally is Yerdu, you have to take it down. Oh, by Dukin Shabbat according to Rabbi Kiva, that there it's going to be Lo Yerdu, so you gain that. You don't have to take it down. What if you slaughter and you find that's a treifa, where there it's also terid, so you did nothing constructive? No, it is something constructive. What we said regarding when it was gully, then you would be chayiv, is because now it's not anymore in the veil, because it's not just a dead animal, so it doesn't have the tumah in the veil. Then what's with the Bryce that says if you slaughter a chatas on Shabbos, b'chutz, l'avay d'zara, that you may chayiv for Shabbos, where you chayiv for Shabbos, even for tumah you didn't remove it from, because it has a tumah of d'zara, oh, it's not even melachai. So ben noich not michayev for eating that. That's what you masakin, and therefore it is constructive, and therefore you chayev on the chil Shabbos of chavala on Shabbos. So we had a teaching of Rahuna Marav that said if you have an asham shenitik l're'iyah, it's an asham, but they only got atonement somewhere else, or whatever it is. It's not an asham anymore, but it is an asham. So you send it up to grace, and then you slaughter it stam, and that was the key word, to be kosher as an oilah. Taste as an oilah? It's an asham. How's that kosher as an oilah? Yeah, you don't need Akira. It's not Asham anymore. It's not going to be used as Asham. Since ultimately it's going to be sold at the double lunch and it's going to be used towards an oil. So it's an oil. It's an oil. Now, but why did you need Nittuk even for? Then you went out Nittuk. No, then we made a Gezeh. That even if you had Kapara, you might do it Lefnei Kapara. And how do we see that? We see that someone else by Asham Shemesa Balav. According to Mishua, that he says you sell it and you bring from its monies as an oil, or what I bring from its monies. If the guy himself is bringing it, it's not even a nidva from the tzibur. He holds not like the Tanakama. Says he brings it himself. Why not the body itself? No, because then if you can let you do it, you can do it with lefnei kapar, and that's the source for that same concept that we see in our Gemara Rebbe. Now the Gemara goes back to ask on Rav. So you're telling me that you don't need akira? That's why the Ashur Shemitah L'Ri, if you shech the stomach, can be kosher as an oil. But I learned in our Mishnah that if you shech and you find out afterwards that there's no more owners anymore, so we said you can be pater because it's an it's fine. But then we had a brace that said if it happens during the weekday, then you're going to burn it right away. Wait a second, you burn it right away? According to Rav, it's automatically a shlomer because you don't need akira. And it's not a pesach because there's no more owners on it anymore. So it's automatically a shlomer. So wait a second, if it's a shlomim, then it's not a psul b'gufay of like what you would have said into the pesach of shloim nuyah. It's not a pesach, it's a shlomim. So what's the problem? What's the psul? There's no psul in shloim nuyah. Must be mishum dava acher. That's because you're shechting after tamid. So wait a second, that's not yishav me'ad, that's liboy yibut surah. Because it's not a psul b'gufay, it should be left there overnight. So the Gemara wants to reject it, says you're right, we have to change Rav's teaching. Must have been that you weren't shachtei stam, you were shachtei l'shem ayla. Oh, I did so, and then it's going to be kosher. Oh, well, that tells us that means say you tell me you need a kira, and that's why you're saying it because I love the Mishnah. The problem is, but what are you going to do with Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg that says that the only time you need akira is only when you rejected Pesach Sheni and Tamei Meis, which means that in general you don't need akira. According to what you do with the halacha of the Mishnah, you don't need akira. So how you can explain the halacha of the Mishnah? It seems to indicate that you do need akira, and that's why it's a Pesach, and that's why you serve miyad, and that's not a shlamim, and therefore that you would have to have ibn surah. So the Gemara goes back. You're right. I'm sorry. Go back. Shachtei stam is when Rav said kashloy, because you're right that you don't need akida. So then why are you burning it right away? Oh, it's talking about where you separated. You made a compensation before chatzas. The owner died after chatzas. Oh, it's what's called nida v'nitcha. Oh, nida v'nitcha is not near anymore. Can't be even a shlam. There is a psul b'gufa. Says Gemara, wait a second. Who are you saying that for? For Rav? Rav holds balichayim in the dachin. A living animal cannot become rejected. So don't mean nida v'nitcha. It's not nitcha. There's a living animal. Oh, the Gemara says, okay, you're right. So we'll say it's like Rabbi Eliezer, but the problem is you can't say it's like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that when you do a shlamim l'shem Pesach, it's going to be psul b'gufay because he goes, it doesn't hold halacha to a mitzvah. So why in potter you should be chayv v'chatos? So the Gemara says, you're right. It's Yosef ben Chinai, who he holds that it's psul b'gufay. When you shech others, which is what this is, we're saying that this is really a shlamim like Rav because you don't need having akida when you do l'shem Pesach. And by Peturi, he holds like be sure that Torah b'dvar mitzvah is going to be potter. But then the Gemara wants to say another approach. You're right. That price that says Yisrael Miyah is not like Rav. Rav was like a different Tana, who holds that you don't burn it right away. Rather two b'tzurasai. Oh, that must be like him. Why two b'tzurasai? Because it's shlam. Because you don't need to have akira. So the Gemara, no. You could say it's not because of blood by akira. You could say that Shmuel B'Yechim Reka is because he holds like the mandam that even pigul needs b'tzura. And you have to say that. Why? Because in the case of Nitmo Bailam, where there most definitely you need to have an akira. Why do you need to have an akira there? Because you say when you're Tamei Meis, you can use it by Pesach Sheni. Everyone agrees. Nizikrim and Pichabur and Pchibagam says that you're going to use it. And if you're not going to use it as a Pesach Rebbe Shalom, you need to have an akira. So obviously that it's a Pesach and a Psul B'Gufay. So obviously that's why you need to have a Ibatzura is because even though it's Psul B'Gufay, you need Ibatzura, and therefore obviously you have to say Rav is not like Shol Recha, and then you have to answer that first price of Yisrael Miyad because it's going like Gizim and Chanoi, and therefore that's not difficult on Rav. Thank you to any time for hosting us. Oh, Hadna Allah El Dvarim, Stark, Chevra Tamshich Od, Adasov, Chazak. That's for the 6 Parakim, 6 exclamation points. Thank you to any time.